which will be made by Nathalie Sanchez, with a talk about does vegetation structure shape the acoustic features of Lincoln Sparrow songs? Please, go on.
Hello, thank you. Yes, well, thank you all for being here in this conference, and I'm sharing with you all one of my thesis chapter. I'm a PhD student at the University of Alberta in Dr. Payne's lab, and yes, my title today is Does Vegetation Structure Shape the Acoustic Features of Lincoln Sparrow Songs? I like to start this talk talking about what are the main processes explaining some variation in passerine birds. The social context is very important because a bird, since the beginning of its life, is going to have the influence of their parents, so they're going to learn songs from their patterns and other adults singing in their natural territories. And then when they disperse, and they create or maintain their own or establish their own territories, they can also be sensitive to learn more songs from tutors, from other adults, and to learn more type of songs and decide what they're going to sing as an adult. Another selection process to some variation is the environment. It is very different to be singing in an open habitat versus a closed habitat. And habitats can also determine which type of songs or sounds transmit best. So in this case, I'm showing a bird singing a high frequency song and a bird singing a low frequency song. And according to the acoustic adaptation hypothesis, high frequency songs are going to transmit less through vegetation in comparison to low frequency songs. So keep this in mind for the rest of the talk. I'm studying, as I said, well, my focal species is the Lincoln Sparrow, which is an understudied species in comparison to its sister species, the swamp sparrow and the song sparrow. There is only one study of song characteristics of these species in the field. And in Alberta, which is my study site located in Canada, we have a lot of recordings, and we notice that they have a higher complexity in comparison to other boreal birds. And I like to say that the recordings that I'm presenting you here and are collected with autonomous recording units across the province. So we decided to study what is the sound variation in Alberta and whether the different vegetation types describe the acoustic features. And we were expecting high frequency sounds and wider bandwidths in more open areas. And the explanation is that the sounds are going to transmit better. And this map is showing the distribution of Lincoln Sparrow in Alberta, in the province. So for the methods, we selected 100 recordings or 100 detections in given locations in Alberta, and we picked the high quality recordings with high signal to noise ratio. And we also extracted the proportion of vegetation at each location using a GIS layer. We have proportion of conifers, mixed wood, deciduous grasslands and shrubs, and marsh in a 50-meter buffer. So we also started a catalog of sounds and syllables for each bird. We described 127 syllables for 69 individuals. And you can notice here the syllable types. And these are 4 different songs of 4 different individuals. For syllables that were shared among individuals, we did a cross-correlation analysis just to see if their acoustic features are going to be grouped in the multivariate space. And here is an example of two individuals sharing one syllable being grouped. For the acoustic features extracted for the analysis using Raven Pro again, I used the power spectrum view, but I'm showing here the spectrogram view just to describe better what we measured: the high frequency part of the song, the low frequency part, the bandwidth, and also we did the same for the first syllable, because this part is important for species recognition among other species. We also did the same measurements for each syllable, and we classified the syllables between shared syllables and unique syllables among individuals. So for results, we use an indirect gradient analysis to compare two set of vectors: the acoustic features from each song and from each individual, and the proportion of vegetation. So we have a set of vectors, and you can think that these are the acoustic features and these are the vegetation. So you might have a positive correlation or a negative correlation. And when two arrows are pointed at the same direction, that means that they are decreasing or increasing together. So here are the results for this part of the analysis. So what we have here is that you can read here, mixed wood and grass, high frequency and bandwidth. So individuals in more open habitats tend to have higher frequency songs and wider bandwidths. In contrast to birds singing in more dense forests such as conifers, they tend to have low frequency songs. And here are two examples of birds singing in a more open habitat, and here a song of a bird singing in a more dense habitat. Now, regarding to shared and unshared syllables, we compared the acoustic characteristics again among three forest types, and we collapsed some of the forests, thinking about if they were more open spaces in comparison to conifers, which is the more dense habitat, and we collapsed deciduous forests and mixed wood were not super common in these studies. So usually other forests tend to be deciduous forests. So we have here bandwidth, low frequency part of the unique syllables, higher frequency, and the length of the syllables. So what we found for bandwidth in conifers, the unique syllables or the unshared syllables were low or they have shorter bandwidths in comparison to the other habitats. So again, for the low frequency part of the song, they have low frequencies in the conifers for the unshared syllables, and the same pattern was found for high frequency part of the syllables, of the unshared syllables. And we didn't find any pattern for the length of the syllables. So with this, we conclude that vegetation structure does shape the acoustic feature of Lincoln sparrow songs. So at higher densities of conifers, Lincoln sparrow had narrower bandwidths and low frequency songs. We haven't tested what is the transmission of their songs, but this is something that can be done for this species using an experiment of transmission, just to confirm this idea. And also for the unshared syllables, we found that they are lower in frequency and lower bandwidth than shared syllables. We think that onshore sea level might be important in neighbor recognitions that has been reported in other species, as well as sexual selection. And this hasn't been tested yet for Lincoln Sparrow, but will be a nice project. And we think that because these unique features of the songs are very important, they need a good transmission in any different environment, especially in more dense environments. And with this, I would like to acknowledge to my colleagues who helped me to understand more of song variation and acoustic features, and also the financial support for many organizations for my PhD project. And I'll be happy to take any questions. I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay, thank you for your presentation. Now we have plenty of time for questions, and eventually, if there, maybe we can also accept questions related to previous presentations. Any raised hand for Natalie?
Yeah, this is Tim Mullet, Gianni,
Okay.
if you don't mind. Hi, Natalie. Let me pick up my video here for you.
Sure, thank you.
Your talk is really quite interesting. I was interested, there was a paper that came out recently that challenges the acoustic adaptation hypothesis. I'm sure you're probably aware of this, by Makula et al. Based on your findings, which are like the evidence seems pretty clear, how would you argue more support for the acoustic adaptation hypothesis when they're leaning towards explaining it through mate selection as an evolutionary driver rather than the habitat itself?
Well, I think this is a long-term process because they have to learn songs, and I think it is going to be more dependent whether the species go back to the same territory, because this is a neotropical migrant, and we don't know if all the individuals come back to the same area, but the ones that go to different areas might need this flexibility. So I think the adults at some point are capable of adjust a little bit, and we have seen these adjustments in other contexts, such as the anthropogenic noise in cities. So I think yes, let's say what they learn, it is very important for what they're going to use in the future, and the flexibility inherent from each species, I think, is the more important part. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for the answer. And now questions from Bernie.
Hi, Natalie. That was an excellent presentation. Thank you. Question, did your study take into account topography or humidity or any of those other issues within the forest that you were analyzing?
That's a good point. We did not, but this was taken, the recordings only in a short period of time during June. So there was not a lot of variation, at least also when we get the recordings from, all of them were from 5 a.m. So maybe we're kind of controlling for that. But the answer is like, we're not taking into consideration what was the temperature when the bird was singing. And also this data is from passive acoustic units. So we were not there. And also because of this range or high or large geographic range, we don't have that information, but it could be useful.
Yeah, I think so, because that's part of the permutation of how song is propagated. Certainly working with Luis Baptista and white-crowned sparrows and Lincoln sparrows up in Lincoln Meadow in the Sierras, we found that when we did the original studies, we were using analog technology at the time, but when we did those studies in the 80s, what we found was that we couldn't get accurate information, and we didn't understand why. And finally, we figured out it was the topography that was making a big difference in the ways these songs were being articulated.
And you mean topography, like differences in elevation?
No, not necessarily, just the ground itself, the features of the geography, if you want to call it that.
Yes. Well, in Alberta, it's very, very plain. We don't have like these changes in elevation, but
did you work at all up near the tar sands?
Near the what?
The tar sands, where they're doing the oil extraction from the
yes. We have all these. This is a very large geographic range.
Yeah.
But yes, there are sites there. Yeah. But this is a very interesting point, and we might have information about the terrain. I will ask my supervisor. But thank you for the input.
Well, thank you for your presentation. It was terrific.
Thanks. Can I read a question here?
Gianni, you were muted.
It's okay. Sorry. The questions from Renata. What is the distance between sender and the intended receiver, and between your recorder and the sender? Are they similar, or there are some maybe differences that can have an impact on your evaluation?
Well, yes, as Renata already said, I kind of explained this. We were not physically there. We were using acoustic, passive acoustic units.
Okay.
But also, I do have, because this is one of my thesis chapters, I'm also testing sound transmission in different, more in the context of chronic noise in the Alberta oil sands areas. But usually you get pretty good recordings as far as 50 meters. So you're not going to lose any features of the songs or syllables that are singing lower, but we already tested that.
Thank you. I think that a very interesting point that's very difficult to understand is what is the real communication range of these birds and how they perceive and receive and interpret the sounds. Because we really don't know which is the range. If the alteration related with the habitat is some way compensated by the hearing system of the animals, and maybe what they receive is a bit different from what we record with a standard recorder.
Yes,
so there's a lot to investigate.
Yeah. Well, I think this is a feature that is been understudied, and also the questions related to these topics, they're always growing and open for discussion.
An information we often don't have is how the animals are able to correctly decode the information, even with degraded sounds. And in some cases, maybe they are more able than us to recognize their own sounds. But
yes. I think, well, in my experience, because I went to the field when they have their territories, they're not very far apart. The male singing, at least it could be from 10 to 20 meters, the next male. So, and also the females are around, they can use higher perches sometime, and that will help them transmit better their sounds. But yes, there's a lot of things to consider, but thank you.
Thank you very much. So the next